In the aftermath of Deltarune chapters 3 and 4, we've gotten just a bit of Berdly. With these few glimpses, there's been some discussion about whether or not he's regressed, and whether or not his arc in chapter 2 was pointless. I find this a really interesting discussion, and since I'm currently working on some more ambitious projects that'll take more time, this seemed like a fun mini discussion and analysis to do. So let's take a look at this dork of a bluebird and what we can glean from these appearances, while contextualizing them with chapter 2. Before we look at chapter 4, we should first establish what Berdly's arc was in chapter 2. I have a more thorough analysis of chapter 2 Berdly, which you can check out in the link up top or in the description. But in short, Berdly started the chapter as boastful about his intelligence, seemingly chauvinistic with how he treated Noelle, and extremely eager to show off and to please Queen. He showed a competitive streak with Chris and Susie, while talking down to them, yet at the same time he did show a fondness for Chris behind his gloating and even offered them a spot in his new Smartopia. I think the biggest point of frustration for Chapter 2 Berdly was how he seemingly talked down to Noelle and acted like they were a couple, and that it was his duty to save and protect her. Ironically, Queen shows a similar tendency to want to coddle Noelle, albeit while having more faith in her strength of character. However, we later learn that Berdly acts this way because he perceived Noelle's kindness toward him as romantic interest. As I mentioned in my previous video, Berdly seems to equate kindness as romantic love from anyone. At one point, he assumes Chris is flirting with him if you talk to him twice after the Queen battle, all because Chris showed concern. He also starts to crush on Susie after she shows kindness and interest toward video games. Combined with Berdly's eagerness to please Queen, I think it's clear that this tendency comes from profound loneliness and lack of social skills. It's possible that Berdly's life was so hollow before that he became accustomed to kindness coming with ulterior motives. It's possible that his interest in video games may have also pampered how he interacts with the world, as games with dating sim elements do tend to have it so kindness equates to affection points going up. And if games were Berdly's real only comfort besides his friendship with Noelle, it's no surprise that he'd use them as a way to make sense of the world. Not only that, but if his parents only rewarded him for good behavior, that would only compound this connection between kindness and ulterior motives. In any case, Berdly does eventually drop his boasting after the puzzles in Queen's mansion utterly confound him, and Chris and Susie solve every one. He's forced to own up to his vulnerabilities and how, prior to one fateful spelling bee, no one paid him any mind. It was only through that small success over Noelle that he suddenly got the attention that he so craved, but his reliance on Noelle's help studying is what allowed him to maintain that image. It's very likely that factors such as parents and school staff and other authority figures, perhaps even Carol, further pressured him to continue this facade. Berdly does truly care for Noelle, but he masks sincerity with a snooty know-it-all personality. It's a mask that gives him self-worth, but also shields him, because being honest and open risks getting hurt or seen as a lesser person. His advances toward Susie are understandably divisive, but I interpret those as him once again going off of assumptions that are easy for him to understand while being terrible at reading the room. I don't think he's an incel. I think he's just kind of an idiot who doesn't know how to talk to people in a way that's genuine. In fact, it's very likely that he sees himself as the main protagonist of his Dark World adventure, the hero of his own story, and he's trying to channel the attitudes fitting of a protagonist. There's also an element of performative masculinity that pervades a lot of Berdly's scenes. Not only his need to protect his damsel in distress, but also with the statue of himself being buff with nipples showcasing his ideal body image. I think in addition to his insecurities regarding his intelligence, there's this need to lean into expectations of what a boy should be. Perhaps a part of it comes from a feeling of powerlessness in his day-to-day life, where he's acting out a lie to protect his image, while people such as Chris and Susie seemingly don't give a shit. It's likely that he's compensating for a lack of fulfillment in his life, and perhaps even a lack of acknowledgement from his peers and parents outside of his grades. Or perhaps he's simply channeling his image of a strong, heroic figure. Maybe he just really wants to be buff and have nipples. But this projection of strength really does feel like it's coming from a place of deep-seated insecurities and a poor self-image. But in the weird route, we do see a more noble side of Berdly, where he's determined to protect Noelle when she's clearly distressed, acting off and being used. He takes his fight dead seriously, even if he ends up frozen for his efforts. And then there's the burnt wing outcome, where if you can't successfully loosen the wire from Berdly in the Queen fight, he fights back her influence and tears it away himself at the cost of one of his limbs. This, combined with him rallying the troops for the Thrash Machine and his attempts to apologize after Giga Queen, do show a more caring side of Berdly, who can set aside his pride when it really counts. But then the chapter ends, and he's told it's a dream, and he seemingly goes back to his performative mask. However, he reluctantly shows openness to studying with Chris and Susie again, so where does the next chapter take us? The state of Berdly in Chapter 4 is pretty route dependent, so I'll start by going over the baseline, uninjured Berdly, normal route. So let's start with the library. At a glance, it's easy to assume he's back to his earlier state of being snooty and rude to Chris and Susie, and there's nothing deeper going on. But look closely at his reactions. Initially, he's shocked to see them at the library on a weekend, which isn't the harshest judgment he could make. Given their attitudes under normal circumstances, it is uncharacteristic of them. Choose to flee, and he quips about how Chris will never beat his speedrun. This falls in line with their competitive tendencies in gaming, and also isn't that out of the ordinary for Berdly. Interact with him again, and here's where it gets interesting. He stumbles over his words, calling them his two least not hated most people. This betrays some of his awkwardness in the aftermath of Chapter 2. He may have been told that it's a dream, but the feelings from the experience still linger. You can also see this if you choose to tell him about the study group, and his first impulse, other than saying Noelle is busy, is that all three of them will have to study together in her stead. He hams it up, acting as though this is a bad thing, and Susie even calls him out on how much he hates them in real life. But as soon as she says that they're going to leave, he freezes up. He looks distressed. Sure, he bluffs, saying that he studies best alone, but given what we learned about him in Chapter 2, this is obviously just something he's trying to save face, and his scrunched-up dialogue portrait only adds to that fact. This is especially clear if you talk to him again after that interaction, and he's all, "Oh, thank God you came back," before once again acting as though this is a bad thing, actually. The comment about Susie being tsundere and confusing sticks out to me, because it really shows how poorly Berdly understands real people. It's one thing to rely on character archetypes from media, but real people are much more complicated. I think this shows that Berdly actually does want to spend more time with them, but now that he's back in reality, with the cyber world adventure framed as just a dream, he's back to his status quo. His image of being the smartest, combined with him working in public, likely influenced his interactions too, even if the only others there at the time are the wet-nosed bandits. So what about his behavior if he burned his wing? What's worth noting is that Susie strikes first, heckling him about his arm without fully realizing the cause. With this in mind, Berdly's defensive response makes perfect sense, and we soon see how upset he is that he can't even move it. Of course, in true Berdly fashion, he immediately diverts the topic by mentioning that he's going to the festival, because vulnerability is scary, and he can't be vulnerable around Susie, of all people. What sticks out to me is that when Susie genuinely wishes he'll get well soon, he stops calling her Susan, uses her actual name, and smiles at the words of kindness, until she shoots it down with more of her typical Susie snark. The real sad thing about this scene is how Berdly admits to having nightmares about his arm being burnt, as well as Susie and Chris being there. Obviously this is because of the events in the cyber world, but neither Chris nor Susie comes clean. Even if Susie contemplates taking him to the dark world to heal him, she isn't comfortable bringing him to their dark world. The barrier of honesty, I think, is important to address, because it not only affects Berdly, but Noelle as well. This is clear in how, despite standing up to Queen in the Dark World, Noelle can't share the same conviction with Carol yet, and I fully suspect this dream excuse is a large part of why. Without knowing their experiences were real, it's easy to brush off the memories and feelings as fantasy. Neither has to fully process or confront what they lived through, creating an inherent distance. Susie and Chris are partially at fault for their dishonesty, as it robbed both of them of a chance to unpack those experiences and deepen their connections. This also means that Berdly is back to assuming Noelle has a crush on him, which is clear in how he views the flower gift as something a platonic friend would never do. This leans into his use of tropes to make sense of reality once more, which carries on into the call at Noelle's house later. I think the call with Noelle is where a lot of the disappointment and discomfort with Chapter 4 Berdly comes from. After all, in the moment of this cute scene where Susie and Noelle finally get to hang out, Berdly calls, asks Noelle to go to the festival with him, and though Noelle is uncomfortable, she feels pressured to accept until Susie intervenes. I think this is a great example of why telling them it was a dream was a mistake, because both have fallen back into their usual routine, where Noelle is afraid to speak her true feelings, and Berdly assumes that he has to be Noelle's love interest because she cares for him and he doesn't want to break her heart. Susie even asks if Noelle forgot, alluding to what happened with Queen. If any regression happened to these two, it's largely due to the lie they were told, yet despite this, there are some interesting things to note with Berdly here. First is Berdly's assumption that Susie has gone yandere for him, which once again has Berdly in the mindset of character tropes from anime and dating sims. Yet he does start to sympathize with Susie in his own weird main character syndrome way, even if he makes the mistake of thinking Susie is a poor girl who needs him to show her cool gaming tricks. It does show that a part of him is softened to Susie, and though she absolutely does not want it, he asks her to the festival. Except Chris picks up. Either response is comical, just as it is revealing. Say yes, and Berdly is flattered, but challenges Chris to prove their affections in a competition with Noelle and Susie. Yet again, we see this main character syndrome, where Berdly sees himself as the protagonist of a dating sim or an RPG with dating sim elements, such as Persona. It really does feel like as long as he views social interactions through this framework, it's easier for him to parse, even if it's an incorrect lens through which to view reality. Sing the Wrong Number song, and Berdly fully believes that Chris will be the next to fall for him. In both cases, he doesn't reject Chris's alleged interest, just as he hadn't in Chapter 2, which is probably great for any Curdly fans, on top of showing that deep down, Berdly doesn't really dislike Chris. For the weird route, there's not really a lot of characterization to go with, considering he's comatose, but it does leave the door open for some kind of development later, if he doesn't just end up dying. There's some room for disturbing explorations of what happens when a mind is frozen fatally in a dark world, while the body persists. But now that we have all this information, we should revisit the initial question posed by this video. So, did Berdly regress? I think the answer to this question is yes and no. As I stated several times, the fact that he was told the Dark World was a dream gives those experiences less gravity than if he had simply been told the truth. It allows him to distance himself from uncomfortable feelings and cling to what should be a comfortable status quo. And yet there are cracks. He doesn't want to be left out when Chris and Susie go to study. He doesn't want to be alone. When shown kindness, however fleeting, he shows genuine appreciation to Susie and actually uses her name. Though he's fallen back into chauvinistic habits in terms of how he treats Noelle, and even the questionable lens through which he views Susie's behavior, he does start to sympathize with Susie. And Susie was lonely before she learned to open up and embrace friendships. It's just that Berdly hasn't seen that side of her outside the dream, so it's less credible. I think the real question we should be asking is if Berdly and Noelle will learn the truth and have to confront those lessons that they put back on the shelf. I think there's been setup in Chapter 4, for Noelle at least, to figure things out, but I genuinely hope Berdly comes to terms with it as well, because I think his arc would feel really incomplete if he didn't have to confront his confusion. Not to mention, his view of things through the lens of gaming archetypes also fits into Deltarune's themes of escapism through fantasy. Gaming is a source of comfort for Berdly in what would otherwise be an empty life without Noelle. And given how easy it is to read him as neurodivergent, it may simply be that this is a tool for him to try and comprehend the complexities of social interactions. It's just not a very good tool, but it's what he knows, and that makes it safe. Chapter 5 is an opportunity to see how things develop with Berdly. What will the festival bring? And will a Dark World erupt in the festival itself, if not Flower King? If he doesn't play a part in Chapter 5's Dark World, there's still room for him to realize the truth during the Roaring. In short, I wouldn't call this a full regression for Berdly, but just a slight step back due to the lies he's been told. I think he's still a really compelling character who, despite his faults, has room to grow, and also feels pretty realistic for a burnt-out gifted kid who sucks at socializing. It's just a matter of whether or not he's actually going to play a meaningful part, or if he's just going to stay comedic relief. And more interestingly, whether any future character opportunities will make his fate in the weird route all the more painful. In any case, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic, as there's a lot to consider. Also, if you enjoyed this analysis, please do consider checking out my recent video on In Stars and Time and its prologue, as the YouTube algorithm sadly did not push it to many people. Likes, subscriptions, and comments will help this channel grow. But if you really appreciate what I do, my Patreon has lots of goodies from work-in-progress video scripts to concept art for Inverted Fate and other projects. Thanks so much for watching, and please look forward to my more ambitious projects in the future. In addition to the meta-narratives video and the Akechi analysis, I'm working on a retrospective to my Undertale webcomic Inverted Fate to celebrate its 10th anniversary. See you again soon!